So in today's video, I want to show you some things that you can try if you have flat feet or collapsing arches. But more importantly, I want to take you through a perspective that I think you need to know in order to better understand why those feet are wanting to collapse in the first place and why flat feet or collapsed arches aren't a foot problem. They're more likely to be a problem with the entire leg as a whole, and the arch is just a consequence of some poor leg mechanics in general. And I think this is just so important because so many of our lower limb complaints can potentially be traced back to poor arch function as well. Whether you're dealing with things like plantar fasciitis, Achilles issues, shin splints, big toe issues, bunions, calf problems, even knee dysfunction, has the potential to be linked to your poor arch dysfunction in some way. And if we take the perspective that it's just an arch issue and we neglect the fact that that arch is probably an issue because of something higher up the chain asking that arch to collapse, then the traditional things that we look towards like orthotics or arch supportive shoes may ultimately be somewhat helpful, but not truly solving the problem long term without ever trying to get behind it to understand why that arch is collapsing as a whole, fix those issues, and then hopefully become someone who used to have arch problems going forwards. So what I want to go through in this video is I want to give you one foot specific exercise to try and improve the strength and the function of the arch of your foot, but I also want to follow that up with 3 different exercises that you may need to do that try and help resolve some of the broader issues that might be asking that arch to collapse in the first place. So I think a great visual that can help explain this is that if you can stand up in front of a mirror so that you can see what goes on at your arches and your feet, and if you do something as simple like a gentle squat, what you may find is if your feet turn out or your knees cave in a little bit, if you watch as I drop my knee inwards, the arch of my foot will also collapse at the same time. So if you're someone who consistently walks with your feet out, or you're someone who just moves generally with your feet out and your knees that tend to cave in, you may find this whole leg mechanic might be the reason why that arch is collapsing rather than having normal leg mechanics and the arch just being an issue on its own. So the first exercise we're going to go through here is one that specifically tries to improve the function and the strength of the arches of your feet. And it's called a short foot exercise. And all it basically requires you to do is you can do this sitting on a chair, obviously. All you want to do is get you to plant your foot and imagine that you're trying to squeeze your foot into the ground. You can place your foot onto a towel and try and pull the towel and scrunch the towel up towards you, but we're ultimately trying to lift the arch of your foot up as you squeeze. We're trying to bias some of the muscles that attach into the top of that arch. We're trying to fatigue those muscles as best as we can so that they can be more resistant to that arch wanting to collapse. But again, if we're just strengthening these muscles and not looking further up the chain for clues as to why those muscles have become weak or overloaded, then we're not going to necessarily ever get to the stage we don't have to keep doing this. We get you to do this 10, 15, 20 times until you feel like you start to get a little bit of fatigue through the arch. You may also feel it through that tibialis posterior muscle that runs down and attaches into the top of the arch, obviously. But ultimately, we want to do enough of these so that you feel some generous fatigue to send a signal to your brain that it's not quite strong enough so that it's prompted to come back better tomorrow to improve the strength and the function of those arch muscles with a short foot exercise. And so the second exercise that I think is really important for you to try if you're trying to improve the function of those arches is we want to take a look at some ankle joint mobility. Now, the reason for this is if your ankle is a little bit stiff, if you do try and squat down, but you run into some ankle restriction, your body's always going to take the path of least resistance and is always going to want to deviate inwards to go around that dysfunction, or at the very least, prompt that arch to collapse unnecessarily. So what we can do, if you have one of these power bands or a band of some sort, basically place it right down the base of your ankle, tie it to something sturdy. We want to stretch it out as far as we can, and essentially with the back foot, keeping the back heel down, we want to bend that knee as far as you feel comfortable. But as we always talk about with this exercise to show from front on, when you are trying to bias the end ranges of your ankle mobility with this joint capsular stretch, it's very easy for your knee to come inwards so that you can go further into the stretch. So if you're finding that you're in this position a fair bit, then we're not necessarily respecting the fact that we want to go through some stiffness as opposed to around that stiffness. So make sure that with your foot straight and that knee rotated out, we almost want to go with your big toe on the ground. We almost want to take your knee out through the outer regions of your toes. And again, from the side, we want to really close that ankle down. You have a choice. You can stay here for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes and allow the band to really explore some of the tension that you might find at the back of your ankle. Or you can just gently oscillate in and out of this position. It's okay to gently lift your heel up and allowing that joint capsule to give over time. And what that should allow you to do is when you are moving, it should now take away some of that restriction that your leg might be compensating for, that might be asking the arch of your foot to collapse unnecessarily. So following on from an ankle specific exercise, we can then turn our attention to something a little bit higher up and look for restrictions through your hips. And again, the reason why this is really important is because if we look at your leg mechanics from a hip perspective, if you are someone who is consistently collapsed through your arch and that hip is internally rotated, then it goes without saying that you might be missing the ability to be able to rotate that leg externally or to turn that knee out and simultaneously lift up through that arch. So what we want to give you to do is an exercise that's based on that hip external rotated position. So a really simple exercise that you can try is just a seated hip external rotation stretch. Obviously, the higher the seat and the further away your foot is, the easier this might be for you. We're looking for some tightness right into the heart of your butt cheek where your back pocket would be. All we want to get you to do is to sit up nice and tall and then basically hinge over the top of your shin. You can rest your arms or your elbows on your legs so that you don't feel like your back is doing anything. But we want to be up nice and tall and lean forward until you find that really nice stretch through your hip. Once you're in that position, you can gently rotate towards your knee. You can gently rotate away from your knee, trying to find the best angle that you feel represents your hip tightness the best. Once you've found that, so for me it's here, you can give that tightness in your glutes a squeeze, hold that for a few seconds. If you push your shin back into your bottom knee, make that area work for, again, 5 to 10 seconds. The idea is that once you stop tensing, the muscle will give a little bit, it'll physically release a little bit, and you should then feel you can go a little bit further into the stretch than what you could before. So again, I've reached my limit here. If you give it another squeeze for 5 to 10 seconds, then again, when you stop tensing, it will relax and you should then feel like there's a little bit more range of motion to play with. And again, the reason why this is just so important is the ability to then keep your knee out into a good position that allows your arch a better opportunity to function more normally, whereas it may not otherwise based on what your hip might be asking it to do. So the final exercise I'd like you to try here to improve the function of those arches is one that again stays focused on the function of your hips, but more specifically trying to develop the strength and the muscle control and the patterning to allow your leg to be in that more externally rotated position to stop the internal rotation and that arch wanting to collapse over time. And a great way to do this is by practicing some squats, but paying attention to how you're doing them. So as we always talk about on the channel, we would prefer you to have your feet straight, but what I would like you to do is to practice keeping your feet straight, keeping your big toes down on the ground, and basically externally rotating your knees or screwing your knees outwards so that you can hopefully feel the arches and see the arches of your foot lift up and trying to put them in a much better position. What you should feel when you do this is not only should you feel the muscles in your feet tense and activate, but you should also feel the muscles in your hips also activate from that position. And why this is really important is because if you can maintain that shape, that feet straight, knees rotated out position, and then squat down, what you should see here is that by keeping those feet straight and those knees out, the arches of your feet shouldn't deviate in any meaningful way. They should stay in the same position, a nice stable shape. The knees should stay in the same plane the whole time. We shouldn't get a lot of this wibbly wobbly stuff that tends to happen. More specifically, when a lot of people do this, you might find that the tendency will be to turn your feet out to get up, or you might find that without realizing it, you'll get up by sort of shunting your knee in, or you'll come down by shunting your knee in and it'll come back out again. To cultivate the patterning required to hold your leg in a better, more stable position, you want to make sure that those feet are straight, those knees are screwed outwards, and that everything stays relatively the same up and down until you can fatigue yourself through your knees, through your quads, but also through those hip muscles that are going to be working really hard. And a great way to get the most out of this particular exercise is that if you have any of those booty bands that just go straight around your legs, TheraBand, TheraTubing, whatever you've got at home, if you can tie something elastic around those legs to the point that you feel that there's a decent amount of resistance, what this is basically going to try to do is it's going to try and dump your knees inwards, but we're going to try and keep some tension out on that band to really reinforce that patterning that we're trying to claim and reclaim by doing these squats or these sit to stands. So after you've done 10 or 15 of these, you should really feel the muscles in your hips firing and burning like nothing you probably felt before with these squats. But ultimately, if you're not actively fighting against that band with some purpose, it can be very easy to still deviate inwards from this position without being able to be at the end ranges of that position for you to get the most out of this exercise. So again, if we can get you to do 10 or 15 reps of those, enough to fatigue you through the muscles in your thighs, but more in the muscles through your glutes, those hip external rotators and the other muscles that help out in that position, then again, over time, we can start to improve the way that your legs are functioning and ultimately the way that your arches are functioning, so that we're trying to get to the broader context behind why that arch might be wanting to collapse in the first place. And while the traditional things like taping, orthotics, arch supportive shoes may make you feel good while you have them on, but ultimately don't give you the results that you're looking for when you take them off. So as always, I genuinely hope that was helpful. Let me know in the comments down below which of those exercises you feel you need to work on the most. Please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel if you are new and you do enjoy this kind of information. But ultimately, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.